Red and blue lights slashed through the pitch-black cabin of the Mercedes. Outside, a smirking, power-hungry patrolman was already unsnapping his holster, ready to ruin the lives of the young black couple he'd just profiled on a quiet suburban road. He thought they were easy targets. He thought he was the law. What he didn't know was that the man behind the wheel wasn't just a citizen. He was a supervisory special agent for the FBI, and the cop had just made the biggest and final mistake of his career. The affluent suburb of Crestview Hills was the kind of neighborhood where the streetlights glowed a soft, welcoming amber. The lawns were meticulously manicured by invisible daytime crews, and the local police force had way too much time on their hands. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 10 o'clock. A damp chill hung in the autumn air, misting the windshields of the expensive cars parked in sweeping, circular driveways. Officer Thomas Kessler sat idling in his black and white cruiser, tucked into the shadows of a towering oak tree near the entrance of the subdivision. Kessler was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man whose gut hung over his duty belt and whose worldview had hardened into a bitter, cynical crust. He was known around the precinct as a proactive cop, a thinly veiled euphemism for a man who used his badge as a license to harass anyone who didn't fit his narrow, prejudiced definition of a Crestview Hills resident. Sitting in the passenger seat next to him was Officer Brian Miller, a 23-year-old rookie fresh out of the academy, still idealistic enough to feel a knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach whenever Kessler started talking. "Watch this," Kessler muttered, his eyes narrowing as a sleek, late-model charcoal Mercedes-Benz S-Class glided past their hidden position. Miller leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Watch what? They're doing 3 miles under the speed limit, Tommy. Tags are up to date. Car's pristine." "You don't look at the car, kid. You look at who's driving the car," Kessler said, a smug, tight-lipped smile creeping across his face. He shifted the cruiser into drive, pulling out onto the main avenue without turning on his headlights. Tints a little dark, but the streetlights caught them at the intersection. Black guy driving. Black woman in the passenger seat, dressed in hoodies. In this zip code at 10:30 at night? In an $80,000 Benz? Yeah, right. Either that car is stolen, or it was bought with money that didn't come from a W-2. "Tommy, you can't just—" "I can do whatever I want, Miller. It's called police work. You'll learn." Kessler hit the headlights and accelerated, closing the distance between the cruiser and the Mercedes. Inside the charcoal Mercedes, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to Kessler's toxic assumptions. Elijah and Celine Charles were exhausted. They had just driven 3 hours back from a grueling, emotionally draining funeral for Celine's uncle in a neighboring state. Elijah, a broad-shouldered man with a sharp, perceptive gaze, was rubbing his temples with one hand while steering with the other. He was wearing a plain, faded grey college hoodie and sweatpants, the only things he'd wanted to put on after spending 3 days in a rigid black suit. Celine, leaning her head against the cool glass of the passenger window, was wrapped in an oversized fleece, her eyes half closed, as soft R&B played quietly from the car's speakers. "Almost home, babe," Elijah said gently, glancing over at his wife. 15 minutes. We'll order some food, take a hot shower, and crash." Celine smiled weakly. "Thank God. I don't think I have the energy to even chew. Maybe just the shower." Elijah chuckled, shifting his eyes to the rearview mirror. His smile instantly vanished. The ingrained instincts of a man who had spent the last 12 years in high-stakes federal law enforcement kicked in. A pair of headlights was riding his bumper, aggressively close. Too close for a sleepy suburban road. "We got a tail," Elijah murmured, his voice dropping into a calm, flat register that Selena knew all too well. It was his professional voice, Celine opened her eyes and looked at the side mirror. Cops? Yeah. Crestview Hills PD looks like. He pulled out of the shadows by the oak grove. He's running my plates right now. You were doing 22 in a 25, Selina said, her exhaustion temporarily replaced by a creeping, familiar frustration. She reached into her purse, her fingers instinctively wrapping around the cold metal of her phone. Is the registration in the glove box? Yes. Don't reach for it yet. Let's see what he does, Elijah said, his eyes flicking from the road to the mirror. He deliberately kept the car perfectly centered in the lane, his hands moving to the 10 and 2 position on the leather steering wheel. He knew the game. He had seen it from the inside and the outside. He knew exactly what the cop behind him was looking for: a twitch, a swerve, a tap on the brakes, any manufactured excuse to initiate a stop. Behind them, Kessler slammed his hand against the steering wheel in frustration. Damn it! Plates come back clean. Registered to a Elijah Charles. No warrants. Clean record. So we let them go, Miller said, clearly relieved. They aren't doing anything wrong. I don't let people go just because their paperwork is clean, Miller. Criminals buy clean cars all the time. He crossed the double yellow line back there on the curve. Miller frowned, his brow furrowing. No, he didn't, Tommy. He was dead center. Are you calling me a liar, rookie? Kessler snapped, his voice hard and venomous. I saw his left rear tire touch the paint. That's failure to maintain a lane. That's reasonable suspicion. Before Miller could protest further, Kessler reached down and flipped the toggle switch. The night exploded in a blinding array of flashing red and blue strobes. The shrill chirp of the siren cut through the quiet neighborhood. In the Mercedes, Elijah let out a slow, controlled breath. Here we go. Start recording, Celine. Keep it low. Keep it steady. He activated his right turn signal, smoothly pulling the luxury sedan over to the shoulder beneath a flickering streetlight, placing the car in park. He rolled down all 4 windows, a standard safety protocol, turned off the engine, and placed both of his empty hands flat on top of the steering wheel. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't reach for the glove compartment. He sat like a stone, the flashing lights reflecting off his calm, unblinking eyes. Just let me do the talking, Elijah whispered. Celine already had her phone propped against her thigh, the camera lens peeking just over the edge of the center console, capturing the driver's side window perfectly. I've got you. Be careful, Elijah. You know how these local guys get. I know exactly how they get, Elijah replied. Kessler stepped out of the cruiser, slamming the door with unnecessary force. He adjusted his heavy-duty belt, puffing out his chest as he walked, with a slow, exaggerated swagger toward the Mercedes. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster, a subtle but deliberate act of intimidation. Miller trailed behind him, approaching the passenger side with a flashlight, looking thoroughly miserable. Kessler stopped just behind the B-pillar of the Mercedes, shining his ultra-bright LED tactical flashlight directly into the side mirror to blind Elijah, before panning the beam aggressively across the interior. The harsh white light washed over Elijah's face, then snapped to Celine, lingering on her for a moment before snapping back to Elijah. Evening, Kessler barked, his voice dripping with forced authority and underlying contempt. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He didn't explain the stop. Good evening, officer, Elijah replied, his voice measured, deep, and completely devoid of the fear Kessler was so used to hearing. Is there a problem? I'll ask the questions, buddy, Kessler sneered, leaning slightly into the window, smelling the air for alcohol or marijuana. He smelled nothing but expensive leather and a faint hint of Celine's vanilla perfume. It irritated him. He wanted a reason to rip them out of the car. Whose car is this? It's my vehicle. It's registered in my name, Elijah said calmly. Elijah Charles. Where are you coming from? We're heading home from a family funeral in Ohio. We live about 10 miles from here." Kessler scoffed, a nasty, incredulous sound. He tapped his heavy maglite against the roof of the pristine Mercedes. Thwack! Elijah's jaw tightened imperceptibly at the disrespect to his property, but his hands remained frozen on the steering wheel. A funeral, right? In hoodies and sweatpants? Kessler mocked, panning his flashlight over their casual attire. Must have been a real classy affair. Let me see your license, registration, and proof of insurance. And I want to see your hands moving real slow. Officer, my wallet is in my back right pocket. The registration and insurance are in the glove compartment right in front of my wife. I'm going to reach for my wallet now, Elijah narrated, explicitly following the textbook procedures taught to civilians to keep nervous cops from opening fire. "Just get the damn ID," Kessler snapped. Elijah slowly retrieved his wallet, pulling out his driver's license. Celine opened the glove box, handed the papers to Elijah, and he extended them out the window. Kessler snatched them from his hand, barely glancing at the registration before glaring at the license. "Elijah Charles, address in the Heights," Kessler read aloud. The Heights was an exclusive, gated community. Kessler's eyes narrowed further. He didn't believe for a second that the man in front of him owned a home there. "What do you do for a living, Elijah?" "I work for the federal government," Elijah said neutrally. He wasn't lying, and he intentionally didn't elaborate. He wanted to see exactly how far this officer was willing to take a baseless traffic stop. "Oh, really? The government? What, you deliver mail? You sort packages?" Kessler laughed, looking over the roof of the car toward Miller, expecting a shared chuckle. Miller just stared at the ground. Kessler turned his attention back to Elijah, his face hardening. "I pulled you over because you couldn't maintain your lane back there, Dave. You were swerving over the yellow line. You been drinking tonight? Smoking anything?" "No, officer. I haven't had a drop of alcohol and I don't smoke, and I am quite certain I maintained my lane perfectly." "Are you arguing with me, boy?" The word slipped out of Kessler's mouth, sharp and deliberate. It hung in the cold night air like a physical strike. "Boy," Celine stiffened, her thumb pressing harder against her phone screen to ensure the recording was capturing clear audio. "He's not arguing with you, officer," Selena intervened, her voice tight but professional. "He's just stating a fact. We haven't done anything wrong." Kessler whipped his flashlight beam directly into Selena's eyes, blinding her. "Did I speak to you? Keep your mouth shut, lady, unless you want to be sitting on the curb in handcuffs. In fact, you know what? Step out of the vehicle, both of you." "On what grounds, officer?" Elijah asked, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the heavy, immovable weight of genuine authority. "You have my information. If you're going to write a citation for failure to maintain a lane, write it. Otherwise, we are free to go." "You don't tell me the law!" Kessler shouted, slamming his hand against the door panel. "I'm ordering you out of the vehicle. This is a lawful order under Pennsylvania versus Mims. Now unbuckle your seatbelt, open this door with your left hand, and step out, or I am going to rip you out through this window and charge you with resisting arrest." Elijah took a deep breath. He knew Pennsylvania versus Mims gave the officer the legal right to order him out of the car during a lawful traffic stop. But the stop itself was pretextual and entirely fabricated. Still, fighting a bad cop on the side of a dark road was a losing game. You fight them in a courtroom, or in Elijah's case, you fight them with a federal badge. But Elijah wasn't ready to play that card yet. He wanted Kessler to dig the hole so deep there would be no climbing out. "Okay," Elijah said evenly. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt. I am opening the door." Elijah stepped out into the chilly autumn air. He stood at his full height, 6'3", broad-chested, towering over the pudgy, red-faced Kessler. For a split second, Kessler looked intimidated, his hand instinctively dropping to rest on the grip of his sidearm. "Turn around, face the car. Put your hands on the roof," Kessler ordered, his voice slightly higher-pitched now. Elijah complied, placing his palms flat on the cold metal roof. Kessler immediately grabbed Elijah's wrists, wrenching them behind his back with unnecessary, brutal force. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Elijah's wrists, biting into his skin. "Hey, what are you doing?" Selene screamed, throwing her door open and stepping out. Officer Miller instantly put his hand out, completely overwhelmed. "Ma'am, please, stay by the car. You're detaining him." "For what?" Selena yelled, holding her phone up openly now, recording Kessler as he patted Elijah down aggressively, kicking Elijah's legs apart. "For officer safety," Kessler grunted, shoving Elijah roughly against the side of the Mercedes. "And because he's acting suspicious. Now I have probable cause to search this vehicle." "No, you don't," Elijah said calmly, his cheek pressed against his own car. "You do not have my consent to search this vehicle. I am explicitly denying consent." "I don't need your consent, Dave," Kessler sneered, leaning in close to Elijah's ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. "I smell marijuana. That gives me probable cause. Miller, keep an eye on these two. If the woman moves, cuff her too." Miller looked horrified. "Tommy, I didn't smell any." "I said I smelled it, Miller," Kessler roared. "Do your damn job," leaving a handcuffed Elijah standing by the trunk under Miller's nervous watch. Kessler gleefully grabbed his flashlight and dove into the Mercedes, convinced he was about to make the bust of the month. Kessler tore through the interior of the luxury sedan like a feral dog. He threw the registration papers onto the floor mats. He ripped the center console open, tossing perfectly organized charging cables, a pack of gum, and hand sanitizer onto the expensive leather seats. He pulled down the visors, shoved his hands under the seats, and aggressively patted down the headliner. He was searching frantically, his frustration mounting with every passing second as he found absolutely nothing. No drugs, no illegal weapons, no stacks of unexplainable cash, just the mundane, clean interior of a car owned by responsible adults. Sweating and breathing heavily, Kessler popped the trunk release. He stomped to the back of the car, glaring at Elijah as he passed. "You think you're smart, huh?" Kessler muttered. "I'll find it. You people always hide it in the trunk." Elijah just looked at him, an expression of profound, quiet pity on his face. "You are destroying your own life right now, Officer Kessler. I highly recommend you close that trunk, take these cuffs off, and walk away." Kessler laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He threw open the trunk lid. Inside there were 2 small travel suitcases, neatly packed, and a heavy-duty black Pelican case, secured with a steel padlock. Kessler's eyes lit up. This was it. The jackpot. Drug runners used Pelican cases all the time to transport kilos of cocaine or bundles of dirty money. "Well, well, well," Kessler said, tapping his flashlight against the hard plastic of the case. "What do we have here, Dave? Looks like a lockbox. What's inside?" "Personal property," Elijah replied flatly, "which you have no warrant to search." "I have probable cause," Kessler spat back, repeating his fabricated justification. "I'm ordering you to give me the key." "I don't have the key on me. It's a combination lock," Elijah said, "and I am not giving you the combination. Opening that case without a warrant is a direct violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." "To hell with your rights!" Kessler shouted, his face turning purple with rage. He grabbed a heavy crowbar from the trunk of his own police cruiser. Miller, standing nearby, went pale. "Tommy, stop. You can't pry open a locked container without a warrant, even with the smell. We need to call the captain or get a K9 out here," Miller pleaded, stepping forward. "Shut up, Miller. I'm the senior officer here." Kessler shoved Miller back. He wedged the flat end of the crowbar under the steel padlock of the Pelican case and threw his weight into it. The metal groaned, screeched, and finally snapped with a loud crack. Kessler threw the broken lock to the asphalt in triumph. He unlatched the heavy clips of the Pelican case and flipped the lid open, a victorious, ugly grin plastered across his face. "Let's see what you're hiding, boy." He shone his flashlight into the case. The grin vanished instantly. The blood drained from Kessler's face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the harsh, flashing lights of his own cruiser. His breath hitched in his throat. His hands, gripping the edge of the trunk, suddenly began to tremble violently. Inside the case, there were no bricks of cocaine. There were no stacks of illicit $100 bills. Resting perfectly in custom-cut foam inserts were two standard-issue Glock 19M handguns. Beside them were two heavy, solid gold badges mounted on thick leather wallets. The bold, dark blue lettering on the credentials next to the badges caught the beam of the flashlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation, United States Department of Justice. Underneath the first badge was a rigid ID card. It featured a stern photo of the man currently standing handcuffed in handcuffs. It read, Elijah Charles, Supervisory Special Agent, Civil Rights Division. Next to it, a second set of credentials, Selene Charles, Assistant United States Attorney, Department of Justice. Kessler felt his knees go weak. The world around him seemed to spin, the flashing red and blue lights suddenly feeling blinding, disorienting, and entirely accusatory. He wasn't looking at a couple of local drug dealers. He was looking at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. And not just any division, the Civil Rights Division, the exact people who investigate, arrest, and imprison local police officers for deprivation of rights under color of law. What is this? Kessler whispered, his voice trembling, all the aggressive bravado evaporating into thin, terrified air. Elijah, still handcuffed, took a slow, deliberate step toward the rear of the car. He looked Kessler dead in the eyes, his voice no longer just calm. It was glacial. It was the voice of a man who held absolute power and knew exactly how to wield it. "That, Officer Kessler," Elijah said, the cold finality in his tone making the rookie officer, Miller, physically recoil, "is the end of your career, and very likely your freedom." Kessler stared down at the golden badges, his mind short-circuiting. He had illegally detained an FBI supervisory agent. He had illegally searched his vehicle. He had destroyed federal property by breaking the lock. He had used a racial slur on body cam and dash cam. And he had done it all in front of an assistant U.S. attorney who was currently recording the entire incident on her iPhone. I didn't," Kessler stammered, his eyes darting frantically from the badges to Elijah, then to Selene, who was holding her phone up, capturing his terrified, pale face in high definition. "Take the cuffs off, Thomas," Elijah commanded, dropping the officer title entirely. It wasn't a request. It was an order from a federal agent. "Take them off right now." Kessler fumbled blindly for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them onto the asphalt. He scrambled to pick them up, gasping for air as panic fully seized his chest. He managed to unlock the cuffs, stepping back as if Elijah were suddenly made of fire. Elijah brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists slowly, deliberately. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. The terrifying calmness remained. He turned to the young rookie. "Officer Miller," Elijah said, reading the nameplate on the trembling young cop's chest. "Is your body camera activated?" Miller swallowed hard, standing at rigid attention. "You?" "Yes, sir. Agent Charles. It's been rolling the whole time." "Good. Don't touch it. Don't turn it off. Get on your radio right now," Elijah instructed, pointing a firm finger at the cruiser. "Call your watch commander. Call your captain. Tell them to get down here immediately. Tell them you have a Code 3 emergency involving a federal agent. Do you understand me?"
"Yes, sir."
Miller practically sprinted to the cruiser, grabbing the radio mic. Kessler took a step back, holding his hands up in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "Agent Charles, Elijah, please. Look, I made a mistake. It was dark. I thought you were someone else. We can just let this go, right? Professional courtesy?" Selene stepped forward, lowering her phone, but keeping the camera aimed squarely at Kessler's chest.
"Professional courtesy?"
she repeated, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You called my husband a boy. You fabricated a traffic violation. You illegally detained him, assaulted him, and destroyed our property under the guise of a fictitious marijuana odor. You don't know the first thing about being a professional." "I have a family," Kessler begged, his voice cracking. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like a physical weight. "I have a pension. 15 years. Please don't do this." Elijah walked slowly toward Kessler, closing the distance until they were only inches apart. Kessler shrank back against the side of the trunk. "You didn't care about my family when you pulled me over," Elijah said softly, the quiet volume of his voice making it infinitely more terrifying. "You didn't care about my rights. You thought I was nobody. You thought you could do whatever you wanted to me in the dark, because you wore a badge and I had dark skin. Well, Thomas, the dark is gone. The lights are on. And you are about to find out exactly what happens when you decide to prey on the wrong people." Elijah reached into the Pelican case and pulled out his gold FBI badge, clipping it securely to the belt of his sweatpants. He looked at the trembling officer. "You are no longer conducting a traffic stop, Officer Kessler," Elijah stated, his eyes locking onto Kessler's terrified gaze. "You are now the subject of a federal civil rights investigation. Do not move. Do not speak. Wait for your captain." The next 10 minutes felt like a prolonged, agonizing execution for Officer Thomas Kessler. He stood paralyzed against the rear quarter panel of his cruiser, his chest heaving, his face slick with cold sweat. He didn't dare move. Every time he shifted his weight, Elijah's eyes snapped to him, unblinking, analytical, and entirely merciless. Officer Brian Miller had retreated to the driver's side of the patrol car, standing rigidly at parade rest, terrified that any sudden movement might implicate him in Kessler's catastrophic blunder. He kept his body camera angled perfectly to capture the entire scene, silently thanking his academy instructors who had drilled the importance of observing and reporting into his head. The heavy, suffocating silence of the affluent Crestview Hills subdivision was finally broken by the wailing scream of approaching sirens. Down the main avenue, 3 sets of strobe lights tore through the darkness. 2 Ford Police Interceptor SUVs and a sleek, unmarked black Dodge Charger roared onto the scene, their tires screeching as they boxed in the Mercedes and Kessler's cruiser. Doors flew open. 4 uniformed officers piled out, hands hovering near their holsters, anticipating a violent shootout. From the unmarked Charger emerged Captain Jack O'Connor, the watch commander for the night shift. O'Connor was a grizzled, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his face heavily lined from 30 years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. He had expected to find his officers in a firefight. Instead, he found Kessler trembling like a stray dog in the rain, and a tall black man in a faded grey hoodie standing calmly by the trunk of a pristine Mercedes, a solid gold FBI badge gleaming on his waistband. "Stand down! Hands off your weapons!" O'Connor barked at his arriving officers, his instincts instantly recognizing the catastrophic shift in the power dynamic. He took a slow, measured step toward the Mercedes, keeping his hands visibly away from his duty belt. "I'm Captain O'Connor, Crestview Hills PD. Someone want to tell me exactly what the hell is going on here?" Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Captain O'Connor, I am Supervisory Special Agent Elijah Charles, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. This is my wife, Celine Charles, Assistant United States Attorney for the Department of Justice. O'Connor stopped dead in his tracks. He felt a sudden, icy drop in his stomach. He looked at Elijah, then at Celine, who was holding up her DOJ credentials alongside her iPhone, the camera lens still glowing red. Finally, O'Connor's gaze drifted to the trunk of the Mercedes, where the shattered steel padlock lay on the asphalt, next to the brutally pried-open Pelican case containing 2 federal-issue Glock 19 MIS. Agent Charles, O'Connor said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to inject a tone of professional camaraderie. It's an honor, sir. There clearly seems to have been a massive misunderstanding here. If my officer overstepped... Captain, let me stop you right there before you implicate yourself or your department any further, Celine interjected, her voice sharp and authoritative. There is no misunderstanding here. Your officer executed a pretextual traffic stop based on blatant racial profiling. He falsified a traffic violation. He illegally detained a federal agent. He used physical force. He fabricated probable cause by claiming he smelled marijuana. He ignored an explicit denial of consent to search. And he violently destroyed personal property to access a locked container without a warrant. O'Connor swallowed hard. Every word she spoke was a hammer blow, driving a nail into the coffin of his department's reputation. He also referred to my husband as a boy on camera, Celine added, her eyes locking onto O'Connor's. Do you understand the gravity of what is sitting on your lap right now, Captain? O'Connor turned his head slowly to look at Kessler. Tommy, he growled, the betrayal and fury evident in his voice. Tell me she's lying. Tell me Miller's body camera is going to show me a clean, righteous stop. Kessler opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. He looked at his captain, his eyes wide with blind panic. Jack, Cap, I thought... It's a dark neighborhood. I thought they were... You thought what, Tommy? O'Connor snapped, closing the distance between them. You thought you could play God? You thought you could bust some heads and find a payday? He thought he had immunity because of the badge he wears, Elijah said quietly. He violated 18 U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. That is a federal felony, Captain. It carries up to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. More, considering he was armed during the commission of the offense. O'Connor took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. He was a pragmatic man. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he had no intention of going down with Thomas Kessler. Agent Charles, O'Connor said, turning back to Elijah, his tone now purely deferential. I apologize on behalf of the Crestview Hills Police Department. This is an indefensible disgrace. What are your orders, sir? Kessler let out a strangled gasp. Jack, no! You can't just hand me over to them. We look out for our own. I have 15 years on the job. You aren't one of my own anymore, Tommy, O'Connor said coldly. You're a liability, and you just picked a fight with the entire United States Department of Justice. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't dial 911. He bypassed the local dispatch entirely and called the direct emergency line for the FBI's regional field office. This is SSA Charles, badge number 44920. Elijah spoke into the phone, his eyes never leaving Kessler. I need an evidence response team and 2 field agents dispatched to my location in Crestview Hills immediately. I have a local police officer, detained for a Title 18, Section 242 violation. Yes. Secured. Local brass is on scene and cooperating. He hung up the phone and looked at Captain O'Connor. Captain, relieve Officer Kessler of his weapon and his badge. Now, Kessler physically recoiled, pressing his back hard against the police cruiser, as if he could phase through the metal. "No, you can't do this. You can't take my gun, Jack. Please. My wife, my kids. I'll lose my pension." The utter lack of dignity in Kessler's pleading was sickening. The man who had acted like an untouchable predator only 20 minutes ago was now weeping openly, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. The young officers standing by the backup cruisers watched in stunned silence as the precinct's most notorious bully was stripped down to nothing. O'Connor stepped up to Kessler, unbuttoning the leather retention strap on the weeping officer's duty belt. "Keep your hands up, Tommy. Don't make this worse." "Jack, please," Kessler sobbed, his voice breaking. "Hands up," O'Connor repeated firmly. He drew Kessler's Glock 17 from its holster, cleared the chamber, and handed it back to one of the younger officers. Next came the taser, the OC spray, and the baton. Finally, O'Connor reached up to Kessler's chest and unpinned the silver Crestview Hills police badge. He held it in his hand for a moment, looking at it with a mixture of disgust and sorrow, before slipping it into his pocket. "Officer Miller," Elijah called out. Miller jumped, standing at attention. "Yes, Agent Charles." "You witnessed the entirety of this encounter," Elijah said, his tone softening slightly, recognizing the stark difference between the rookie and the veteran. "You attempted to intervene. You advised Officer Kessler against breaking the lock. Your body camera captured everything. Your cooperation tonight is going to determine whether the federal government views you as an accessory to a civil rights violation or as a cooperating witness. Do you understand?" "I am a cooperating witness, sir," Miller said instantly, without a shred of hesitation. "I'll give a full statement. I'll hand over the body cam footage right now." Kessler glared at Miller through his tears, a flash of his old venom returning. "You little rat, you spineless little—" "Shut your mouth, Thomas," Elijah commanded, the sheer force of his voice silencing Kessler instantly. "You don't get to speak to him. You don't get to intimidate anyone ever again. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." O'Connor produced a pair of his own handcuffs. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound echoed in the quiet street as the captain locked the cuffs tightly around Kessler's wrists. The poetic justice of the moment hung heavily in the air. "You're under arrest, Tommy." O'Connor read the Miranda warning from memory, his voice devoid of emotion. Celine stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with her husband. She looked at O'Connor, her expression uncompromising. "Captain O'Connor, I want to be very clear about what happens tomorrow," Celine said, her voice echoing with the full weight of the federal government. "By 8 a.m., my office will be issuing a federal subpoena for the personnel files, arrest records, and dashcam footage of Officer Kessler spanning the entirety of his 15-year career. Every ticket he's written, every arrest he's made, every complaint filed against him that your Internal Affairs Division conveniently brushed under the rug. We are going to tear his history down to the studs." O'Connor swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yes, Mom, we will comply fully. And if we find a pattern of this behavior, which I guarantee you we will, the DOJ will be opening a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Crestview Hills Police Department," Selena continued, her eyes sweeping over the other officers standing in the street. "We will audit your training, your traffic stop statistics, and your use of force reports. If this department has a culture of letting men like Kessler use badges as weapons of prejudice, we will dismantle it and put you under a federal consent decree." O'Connor looked physically ill. The actions of one racist, arrogant cop were about to bring the wrath of the United States Justice Department crashing down on his entire city. "Understood, ma'am," O'Connor said quietly. 15 minutes later, 2 black SUVs with federal government plates arrived. 3 FBI agents stepped out, their faces grim and professional. Elijah briefed them quickly, handing over the shattered Pelican case lock and ensuring Selene's video footage was securely transferred to their encrypted servers. The federal agents took custody of Thomas Kessler. As they walked him toward the back of their SUV, Kessler looked back over his shoulder one last time. He looked at the charcoal Mercedes. He looked at the quiet, affluent neighborhood he thought he was protecting. And finally, he looked at Elijah Charles. Elijah stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest, the gold shield gleaming in the flashing lights. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just watched as the doors of the federal vehicle slammed shut, sealing Kessler's fate. The predator had finally met the apex, and he had been devoured. By 8 a.m. the following morning, the United States Department of Justice had effectively set the Crestview Hills Police Department on fire. Selena Charles did not bluff. She sat in her corner office at the federal building in downtown Philadelphia, flanked by 2 senior DOJ investigators. The subpoenas she signed were sweeping, demanding, and uncompromising. She didn't just request Thomas Kessler's personnel file. She subpoenaed every dashcam video, body cam upload, use of force report, and citizen complaint associated with his badge number for the last 15 years. By noon, the mayor of Crestview Hills had called an emergency press conference. Sweating profusely under the local news cameras, he announced the immediate suspension of the chief of police pending a federal inquiry, distancing the city's administration from Kessler as fast as humanly possible. In a sterile federal holding cell, Thomas Kessler sat on a rigid steel cot, wearing an orange jumpsuit that felt like sandpaper against his skin. The bravado he had wielded like a club the night before was entirely gone. He was waiting for the cavalry. He expected the Police Benevolent Association to send their highest-paid bulldog, a legendary union defense attorney named Richard Davies, to burst through the doors and bail him out. He expected the blue wall of silence to protect him, just as it always had. At 2 p.m., the heavy metal door to the interrogation room finally clicked open. Richard Davies did walk in, but he wasn't carrying bail papers. He was carrying a single manila folder, and he looked incredibly grim. "Rich," Kessler gasped, standing up and gripping the edge of the metal table. "Thank God. Tell me we're getting out of here. The judge has to grant bail. I've got a family. Tell me you're burying that rookie's body cam footage." Davies didn't offer his hand. He sat down slowly, placing the folder on the table. "Sit down, Tommy." "What? No, get me out of here." "Sit down," Davies barked, the sudden sharpness in his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Kessler flinched and slowly sank into his chair. "I'm not here to represent you, Tommy," Davies said coldly, adjusting his expensive tie. "I'm here as a courtesy from the union to tell you that you are on your own. The PBA is officially severing all ties with you, effective immediately." Kessler's jaw dropped. The blood rushed from his head, leaving him dizzy. You can't do that. I pay my dues. I have 15 years. The union protects us." "The union protects cops who make honest mistakes in the line of duty," Davies corrected him, leaning forward. "You didn't make a mistake. You went rogue. You pulled over a black man because of his car and his zip code. You called an FBI supervisory special agent a boy on high-definition audio. You destroyed federal property. And worse, you did it to a man whose wife is a senior prosecutor for the Civil Rights Division." Davies opened the folder, revealing a stack of freshly printed DOJ indictments. "Selene Charles has already pulled your jacket, Tommy. Within 6 hours, her team found the Michael Bradley case from 2018. Kessler stopped breathing. Michael Bradley. The name hit him like a physical blow to the ribs. "That's right," Davies said, seeing the absolute terror in Kessler's eyes. "A 19-year-old college kid you pulled over for a busted tail light. He consented to a search, and you miraculously found 3 ounces of cocaine in his trunk. He got 5 yours. But the DOJ pulled the GPS telemetry on your cruiser from that night. You sat in an evidence impound lot for 20 minutes before you pulled him over. They have enough to prove you planted it. Tommy, and they're looking into the Martinez brothers, the eviction in the Heights, all of it. They aren't just charging you for last night. They are dismantling your entire life. My pension, Kessler whispered, his voice cracking. My wife. Your wife filed for a protective order this morning to distance her assets from the civil suits that are about to rain down on you, Davies said, standing up and straightening his jacket. And your pension is frozen under federal asset forfeiture laws due to your crimes being committed on duty. You're radioactive, Tommy. If the union stands by you, the DOJ will put the entire department under a consent decree and dismantle us. You're the sacrificial lamb. Have a nice life. Davies turned and walked out, the heavy steel door slamming shut with a terrifying finality. Kessler fell to his knees on the cold concrete floor, weeping uncontrollably. The badge he had used to terrorize his community was gone. The brothers in blue, who he thought would hide his sins, had abandoned him. He was completely, utterly alone. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Philadelphia was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens furiously scratching across notepads. The gallery was filled with civil rights activists, off-duty FBI agents, and several citizens of Crestview Hills who had finally found the courage to step forward. Sitting in the front row of the gallery was Michael Bradley. He was no longer a terrified college kid in an oversized county jail uniform. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his record fully expunged, watching the man who stole 3 years of his life face the apex of his karma. At the prosecution table sat Celine Charles. She looked immaculate, an avatar of absolute justice, her files perfectly organized. Beside her sat Elijah Charles, wearing his dark, tailored FBI suit, his gold shield clipped to his belt. At the defense table sat Thomas Kessler. The 6 months in federal lockup had aged him a decade. His hair had thinned and gone stark white. He had lost 30 pounds, his skin sallow and grey, drowning in a cheap suit provided by his overworked public defender. He kept his eyes glued to the mahogany table, unable to look at the people he had wronged. The Honourable Judge Harrison Caldwell, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding police corruption, slammed his gavel. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. We are here for the sentencing of Thomas William Kessler. Judge Caldwell's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing with heavy, inescapable authority. A jury of your peers has found you guilty on 3 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 1 count of destruction of government property, and 2 counts of evidence tampering. Judge Caldwell looked down over his reading glasses, his eyes piercing through Kessler. Law enforcement is a sacred trust. Society grants officers the power to detain, to use force, and to carry weapons, with the absolute expectation that this power will be used fairly, blindly, and justly. You, Mr. Kessler, viewed that sacred trust as a weapon to enforce your own bigotry. You terrorized a neighborhood you were sworn to protect. You targeted individuals because of the color of their skin. You thought you were the law. The judge paused, gesturing toward the prosecution table. But on the night of October 14th, you pulled over the wrong car. You pulled over Supervisory Special Agent Elijah Charles and Assistant United States Attorney Celine Charles. And in doing so, you dragged your own vile practices into the searing light of the federal justice system. Because of their courage, not only have your crimes against them been exposed, but the wrongful conviction of Michael Bradley has been overturned. A soft, emotional gasp rippled through the gallery. Michael Bradley put his head in his hands, tears of relief finally falling. "Mr. Kessler, please stand," Judge Caldwell ordered. Kessler stood, his legs visibly shaking. He looked pathetic. The public defender had to hold his elbow to keep him upright. You abused your badge, so I will strip you of its protections. You used your authority to cage innocent people, so now you shall be caged. Thomas Kessler, I hereby sentence you to 144 months, 12 years, in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay complete restitution, and your state pension is permanently revoked. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Officers, remand him. The sharp clack-clack of handcuffs echoed through the courtroom. It was the same sound Elijah had heard on the side of that dark road. But this time, the steel was biting into the wrists of the guilty. U.S. Marshals flanked Kessler, grabbing him roughly by the arms. As they marched him down the aisle toward the holding cells, Kessler's eyes briefly met Elijah's. There was no smirk left, no arrogance, only the hollow, terrifying realization that his life was completely, irrevocably over. He would spend the next 12 years in a federal prison, surrounded by the very people his corrupt system had put there. As a former cop, his days would be a nightmare of isolation and fear. Elijah didn't blink. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that justice, absolute and unyielding, had been served. Outside the courthouse, the crisp spring air felt like a revelation. The sun was shining over the Philadelphia skyline. Flashbulbs went off as reporters shouted questions, but Elijah and Selene ignored them, walking down the wide marble steps hand in hand. They reached the bottom of the steps, where Michael Bradley was waiting. The young man stepped forward, his eyes red but shining with a profound, unbreakable gratitude. Agent Charles. Mrs. Charles, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, shaking both of their hands firmly. I don't know how to thank you. I thought I was going to be a felon for the rest of my life. You gave me my life back. Elijah smiled, a genuine warm expression that erased the cold professionalism he wore in the courtroom. He clapped a heavy, reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. You got your own life back, Michael. You survived him. We just helped take out the trash, Elijah said. Now go finish your degree. Do something great. Selene smiled brightly. And if anyone ever pulls you over for a busted taillight again, you call me. They watched Michael walk away, a free man, his head held high. Elijah turned to his wife, wrapping his arm around her waist as they walked toward their charcoal Mercedes, parked legally at the curb. You know, Elijah mused, unlocking the doors with a soft beep. We never did get to order that food after the funeral. I'm starving. Selena laughed, the sound bright and clear. I think a celebratory steak is in order, and maybe a new padlock for the Pelican case. They got into the car, the engine purring to life. As they pulled out into the city traffic, the flashing red and blue lights of a distant police cruiser reflected in the rearview mirror. But this time, Elijah didn't tense up. The predators were still out there, hiding in the dark. But so were the apex protectors. And thanks to Elijah and Selene Charles, the dark was just a little bit brighter. The story of Officer Kessler is a chilling reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked, and arrogance blinds a person to the reality that true justice always catches up. He thought he was untouchable behind his badge, preying on those he deemed powerless. But karma has a way of introducing the apex predator to the ultimate protectors. Elijah and Selene Charles proved that the law is a shield for the innocent, not a weapon for the corrupt. If you enjoyed this dramatic story of justice and karma, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories. Don't forget to comment down below. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's shoes? See you in the next video.